Around a year ago, this girl at my work expressed she had feelings for me. I was planning on moving away for the school term, and I said now wasn't the best time for me as I was moving soon. She understood, took it well, and honestly, things really weren't that awkward at work. Fast forward a little bit now. I started noticing that she would always be at work when I was, and later heard from 2 coworkers that she was purposely picking up shifts, coming into work early, or even coming to buy something specifically to see me. I didn't think much of it, as that's not solid enough reasons to report someone, and I didn't think it was weird yet. However, the time I started getting weirded out by her was when she would finish her shift and sit in the parking lot for an hour, but would leave when I did. Or she would move her car next to mine while on her break. She would get an iced coffee when I was working, and then would sit in the parking lot drinking it for around 30 minutes to an hour. I also started to notice a serious repeat of when I was working, she would either pick up a shift while I was there or come by. Regardless, I was starting to get the suspicion that she knew my schedule, because sometimes I'd work at a different McDonald's in town, and she would coincidentally come by during my shift. When I started putting things together, I started keeping my distance from her at work, which resulted in her texting me, asking if she had done something wrong. Because I didn't respond within the first 2 hours of her text, she started sending more messages, saying that she was going to block me because I hadn't responded yet. I told her that I had a suspicion that all those coincidences from earlier at work were her plan to see me. She denied it, of course, but I had no reason not to believe her. I told her that as long as we were just friends, I was fine with that, but I made it clear that I didn't want anything more ever. More time had passed by, and I had now gone to school for the year, and I was back at McDonald's for the summer, but this time only on weekends and Fridays. But even on my first day back, she started doing the same stuff as before. I tried being cold to her at work, hoping that she'd lose interest, but she kept doing everything she did. All this has been going on for a year, and I never thought to report it to management because she hasn't done anything too extreme. Until recently. I had a coworker tell me that she asked a manager for my address and they gave it to her. Why that would happen, I don't know. Although the address I have on file is outdated, we only moved a bit further down the street, and she knows which car is mine, so she would be able to find it still. I didn't know how to feel about that when I heard it. While I was on a walk, I noticed her car coming off my street. Then, a week later, after I was leaving my shift, I want to say she got done a bit before me or at around the same time. As I was driving home from work, about to turn onto my street, I noticed her car was behind me. I confronted her about it one day after work, not before telling a manager about her driving to my house and everything else that happened. She denied it again and said that she was trying to find a different job because of my attitude towards her. I made 2 jokes at her expense, hoping she'd lose interest and avoid talking, but if that's what she's referring to, I think she's trying to find a way to turn this around on me. When I was younger, I worked at a hotel. The hotel was pretty standard. It had several floors, a bunch of rooms, and on the main level was the front desk as well as the pool, breakfast room, and some ballrooms. I worked the front desk in the overnight hours. It was pretty easy because nothing would ever happen. People would rarely check in after like 10 p.m., and nobody would really come to the desk overnight. So I would pretty much just sit there and go on my phone. Sometimes I would do a little cleaning, like sweeping or vacuuming floors, but that was mostly just to stay busy. One night I was working at the desk like normal. Things were quiet and I had really nothing to do. At 2 o'clock in the morning though, I heard someone come walking in my direction from down one of the hallways. I looked and saw a man walking towards me. He was average height and build and had dark hair. The guy seemed kind of odd right from the start. He walked up to me and said that the air conditioning in his room didn't work. I asked him some questions about it to try to determine if it was broken or how it was broken. He didn't know much. It made me wonder if it was really broke or if the man just didn't know how to use it. He wasn't understanding me though. He said that he was confused and asked if I could show him how to use it. I had nothing better to do, so I said sure. The air conditioning in the hotel could be confusing to use if it's your first time, I guess. So I followed the man to the elevators and went up to one of the other floors. I don't remember which one it was. He didn't say anything as we went up, and it was really awkward. I tried making a little bit of small talk, but the man didn't really say anything. Then we walked to his room, and he opened it. When we got inside, I walked over to the AC, which was at the far end underneath the window. I turned it on no problem, and I started to tell the guy how to use it. He stayed right by the door, though, and didn't walk closer to me, which I found a little bit odd, because he was completely on the other side of the room. He nodded his head and said yes, and I was wondering why he wouldn't go closer to me. The guy was still seeming really strange, so I decided to leave at that point. I told him that the AC was on and running now and the room would cool down for him. He didn't say anything. He was still standing right in front of the door, blocking my way from leaving. I walked over to him and he still didn't move. I said, "Excuse me." The man was looking at me but did not say anything. After both of us standing there facing each other for a few seconds, the man finally spoke. He said I was not leaving. As soon as he said that, I reacted the only way I knew. I backed up, took out my phone, and instantly dialed 911. I did all that within probably 5 seconds. I put the phone on speaker and walked away from the guy towards the other side of the room. He started walking after me and told me to stop. As soon as the call started connecting with police though, the man turned around and then just took off and left the room. He didn't have any suitcases or luggage or anything in the room at all. He just left. I ran out of the room and went back down to the front desk. I didn't see the man as I did that. I told the cops what happened and they showed up, but by the time they did, the man was gone. There was an investigation done, and I only heard that he checked in earlier that day when I wasn't working. He apparently must have used a fake ID to check in or something like that. I'm not sure if he was ever found. I'm also not sure what his plan was, but I'm glad that I reacted well in that situation. A few years back, I was working at a mall. I worked in a department store that was sort of in the middle of the mall, and it was usually fairly busy. I had the job for several years, and among all the workers we had a conspiracy joke about the faded man. He was a person reported by multiple workers and even mall shoppers as a mysterious figure with his face covered. He would allegedly be seen late after hours or in creepy spots during the day. Nobody had any proof, which was kind of odd. One of my friends, Kevin, who worked as a security guard, claimed that he had seen him on camera footage once or twice, but none of us were allowed to view the footage without clearance. Even Kevin said trying to zoom in on the man's face was difficult because the quality of the video just wasn't that great, so we couldn't really identify him. A lot of us didn't buy it, and I was very skeptical, having never seen him myself, though I always sort of wanted to. But one night, that all changed. It was a little bit before closing, and I had taken the last shift at the store. Most of the other workers had already left. Only my manager Tony and I were around doing some late shift work. All of a sudden, I felt like I was being watched. I needed to look around to see who was there, so I stopped and glanced up, but I saw nobody. I thought to myself that it was all in my head. As I turned back to my work though, I saw a tall figure standing near the storage door, half hidden in the shadows, just watching me. His face was mostly covered, and he was tall, about 6'6". I couldn't believe it. He was just standing there watching me, or at least that's what it looked like. I couldn't hear my thoughts over my heart pounding. He was real. I stuttered and called out in fear as Tony came running over in a panic, asking what was wrong. I just pointed. Tony had never seen him either, but he didn't hesitate to shout, "The mall's closed, you need to leave." The tall man standing in the shadows didn't respond. He didn't even move. Then he took a step towards us, and in that moment I started to panic badly. I began hyperventilating because it was only Tony and me in this entire store with a man who was like 6'7" and had been known to disappear in an instant. As Tony and I stepped back in fear, the man looked to his left as if he saw something and suddenly bolted. I couldn't move, still terrified of what this man could do if he got a hold of us. But Tony sprinted after him without a second thought. I ran after Tony because I didn't want to be left alone. So we ran behind this guy towards the back room of the store. I couldn't stop shaking as we looked between boxes in the dimly lit back room. All of a sudden, Tony bolted left, sprinting into one of the aisles, disappearing into the darkness. I was left alone again. Then I heard a box fall to my right. There he was, standing even closer than before. This time I could make out his face a little better. He was about 40 years old, super tall, with long hair, a long beard, and just darkness in his eyes. He looked malicious, like he wanted to hurt me. It was a terrible feeling when I saw him staring at me and I couldn't move. He started taking slow steps forward, and then Tony yelled out my name. I looked over in relief to see Tony running back my ways, and then when I looked back towards the man, he was gone. I didn't know if he had disappeared or if he was ever really there and it was just my imagination, but I was too scared to even process what I thought had just happened. My mind was racing and I almost blacked out. We searched for a while longer but couldn't find anything, not a trace. We even checked the footage, but it just had happened to be in a place where no cameras were, as if he knew all the blind spots. I couldn't sleep for days after that, fearing that he had followed us home or something. Weeks later, after taking time off because I was so traumatized, he was finally caught. Tony had seen him one night again and made sure to call the cops this time instead of chasing him. Officers searched the area and found a small crawl space between the ceiling tiles, which had been used to turn into a makeshift campsite. When I read the news report, I learned that the man had been hiding there for almost a whole year. They never released who he was or how he ended up in the mall, only that he was still in custody for questioning. I ended up quitting because I couldn't fathom the idea of reliving that situation again. I was on a road trip with my friend John one time years ago. We were driving back home and taking turns driving so that we could go longer throughout the day. One of the days driving back, after driving for about 14 hours straight pretty much, it was getting late. We both wanted to stop and get some sleep. I happened to be driving, so John said that he would find us a hotel. Well, that was a terrible mistake, because my friend John is a cheapskate. He said that he found a great place, and I took his word for it, which was another huge mistake. I specifically remember that I asked him if it was nice, and he said yes, it looked nice. I said that I didn't want to stay in some crappy motel. I even said that I would drive longer and pay a little more. He said no, the place looked just fine, and I said okay. I followed his directions, and about 20 minutes later we pulled off the highway and into this small town. There was really nothing there, and I just had a feeling like this place was going to suck. This town was dark, with hardly any streetlights. After a while we pulled onto this dirt road, and I asked him where we were going. He said we were almost there, and like a minute later I saw the place. There was this really sketchy looking motel, which was by far the worst motel I have ever seen in my life. And I'm not some snob who only stays in 5-star hotels. I've stayed in plenty of places like Red Roof Inns or even Super 8 motels. This made Super 8 look like a 5-star place. I told John to find another place because this place sucked. He said it was too late, he already booked it, and I owed him $20, which was my half of the room for the night. I pulled into the parking lot and then looked on my own phone for hotels in the area, but I wasn't getting a signal. John insisted on staying there and got out of the car. I was annoyed but also tired from the long day, so I said whatever and followed John. He got the keys to the room and we walked over. It was a hotel that had just one level. All the rooms were in one long row and they all opened right out to the parking lot. There were like 3 other cars in the entire parking lot that was filled with cracks and weeds in the concrete. Surrounding the place was literally nothing. There was an empty lot to the left and then an abandoned gas station to the right. We went inside of our room and John went over to the far bed and fell asleep on it instantly. He was literally sleeping within 5 minutes. I went to my bed and sat down on it. I was not tired but very thirsty and had run out of water. I was also hungry, so I left the hotel room to see if there was a vending machine or anything. When I got outside, it was completely quiet. I walked around the building, and to my luck, there was in fact a vending machine at the far side of the building by the offices. It was in between the small office building and the motel building, so there was like a little walking alleyway there. I went up to the vending machine and saw the selections. There wasn't much, so I just got water. Except when I put the dollar in and selected the water, nothing happened. I got scammed. I was so mad. Then, out of nowhere, this guy walked up to me. He came from behind the motel building, and there was literally nothing back there. The guy had long, gross-looking stringy hair and was really skinny. He didn't say anything, but just walked about 5 feet from me and then stopped. I saw him looking at me, and I said hi to be friendly. He didn't say hi back to me, though, so at that point, I just walked away. Instantly, I heard him walking after me. I went faster and went down the sidewalk towards the rooms. I heard the man's footsteps about 20 feet back. I quickly got to our room, and when I stopped, I heard that the man was now running. I didn't bother to look back. The key thankfully worked right away, and I opened the door, went inside, and slammed it shut in an instant. I locked the door, and literally the next second, the man tried entering. Then he started banging on the door. I had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, but I couldn't say I was very surprised with this with where we were staying. Then the man started yelling stuff, but I couldn't make out any of it. After yelling incoherently, banging on the door, and trying to get in for a good 5 minutes, he finally ran away. Then things were fine. John slept completely through the entire thing. I was finally able to go to bed a while later. The next morning, John claimed that he got the best sleep of his life, and that we got a great deal with that hotel. I told him that he slept through us nearly getting attacked by some crazy guy. He didn't believe me when I told him what happened. He thought that I just made it up, but it definitely happened, and I'm never going on a road trip with him again. About 9 years ago, my family and I were living in an extended stay hotel until we found a home to move into. We had been there a while and had made quite a few friends. We learned that some people had lived there for over 10 years. One morning, my mom and I were relaxing in our night clothes while watching TV. We heard quite a bit of commotion coming from the hallway, but ignored it because noise there was common. Around 10:45 p.m., someone knocked loudly on our door. They identified themselves as police. My mom and I were taken aback. Every door had a peephole, so we cautiously looked through it, and sure enough, a policeman stood in the hallway. We opened the door just a bit. He informed us that there was a situation happening in the hotel, and that we would need to evacuate immediately. We told him that we needed to get dressed, and he urged us to hurry. We asked him what was happening, but he wouldn't tell us any details. We quickly dressed, grabbed our purses, and headed out. Everyone was fleeing the hotel in groups, some people driving away. It was chaotic, and we were nervous and afraid. There were a lot of cops outside, many cop cars lined up. We asked others if they knew what was happening. We got different stories though. Some said a possible bomb threat, while others said somebody was holding someone hostage in one of the rooms. We all headed down the street to another hotel and stood outside as tactical units and news crews showed up to the scene. We were worried as the hours ticked on and nothing was changing. We had nowhere to go and we were getting hungry, and whatever was happening wasn't resolving itself. After hour 5 of standing outside, a nice hotel neighbor drove me to McDonald's around the corner for food, while my mom contacted one of my cousins who was at work. After hour 7, my dad was back and the situation was still unchanged, as many of us were still outside. Some people went to other hotels, while others slept in their cars. We weren't allowed to go back and retrieve any of our needed items. My cousin left work and picked us up. She took us shopping for overnight supplies and we slept over at her house. We found out later through the news that a young man and woman with outstanding warrants for robbery and drug possession had been taken into custody after a 12-hour standoff with police. Apparently, they had barricaded themselves in their room and refused to come out for 12 hours. They said when they finally coaxed them out, they came out peacefully. That's great and all, but they scared the daylights out of the rest of us and inconvenienced everyone greatly. That was a crazy and scary situation because we didn't know what was happening. I'm glad it all ended well, and I'm grateful for my hotel neighbors and cousin. There was an asbestos problem in my apartment, so the council paid for me to stay in a hotel until the problem was fixed. I walked into the lobby, and it was about 6 p.m., and it was starting to get dark. I walked up to the desk and informed them of my booking. The staff went to find my room key, so I decided to sit down on the sofa in the lobby. This man with a black hoodie on walked into the lobby and sat down on the space next to me. He didn't say anything, he just stared at me. I got kind of creeped out by this guy, and I asked, "Do you need anything?" He replied, "Nothing, it's just your eyes." I'll admit I was absolutely terrified. Luckily, at that moment, the staff returned with my key. I was walking down to my room, and I turned behind me to see the man from earlier following me. Stupidly, I called out, "Hey, you're the guy from earlier. Where are you headed?" He replied, "Room 58, which was my room number. I told him that was my room, and I think he had made a mistake, but he didn't reply. I hurriedly inserted my rusty key into the lock and turned it, and as I turned around to shut the door, I caught sight of the man just standing outside of my door staring at me with a completely static face. I unpacked and laid in bed watching TV. I was thinking that even if somebody was stalking me, how could they get in, and why would they even try? Basically, I was making up lies in my head to make myself feel better. After 3 hours or so, I decided to hit the light and go to sleep. I woke up around midnight to the sound of someone trying to open my door, not slamming into it, but inserting something into the keyhole and trying to fiddle with it so the lock would turn. I walked up near the door and said in a fairly loud and aggressive voice, "It's late, can you please leave?" I heard them stop trying to open the door, and then the voice of the man from earlier said, "But I want to say goodnight." I freaked out and called the reception of the hotel. I told them what was happening and asked them to have someone come and remove the man from the hotel or to call the cops. After I finished the call, I heard the man talking, and he said through the door, "Why would you kick your best friend out?" He was obviously trying to creep me out, and it was working, so I finally replied, "Leave me alone, I have a gun." I then heard the man run away, but I also heard the voices of the hotel staff saying, "Sir, you need to leave the premises now." To this day, I still do not know what would have happened to me if the man had managed to get in. I currently work the overnight shift for a major brand hotel. Like any job I've had, most of the people I deal with are pretty normal and nice. Being the overnight shift, I get my fair share of weirdos too, of course. Although most of the weirdos don't make me nervous, and I don't have to consider calling the police. If you have a working credit card and an ID, and don't seem like you'll be a problem, I'll rent a room to you. I'm only mentioning this to highlight that it's rare for me to turn people away when we have availability. One night at 3 a.m., I had a walk-in guest who was an exception to both of these things. I saw this guy come in on camera, so I went out to the front desk to greet him. Right away, I noticed he had the craziest eyes I've ever seen in my life. This guy was staring at me in a way I cannot possibly describe. I'm sure he didn't even blink. He gave me a bad feeling. As he approached with his crazy eyes, he said, "Why are you so nervous? Why is everyone so nervous? What's going on?" At that point, my guard was way up, but I was still willing to rent him a room. I said, "No one is nervous," and asked him if he needed a room. I asked him for his ID and credit card, and he hesitated in a way that made me think he was going to pull a weapon out. Right away, I turned around and retreated to the back office and closed the door. I observed him in the camera for maybe a minute and decided to go out again. He handed me the ID and credit card, and as I was putting his reservation in, he pointed at the table behind me and said, "Who designed that?" I instantly knew he just wanted me to turn around and look at the table so I would turn my back on him. Without glancing away, I told him to leave, and then he pointed to a cop badge in his wallet and said something like, "Did you see this? Are you okay? Everything is okay here." He was acting fake concerned that I was possibly being victimized by someone else at the hotel. I assumed the badge was fake, but I didn't care either way, and I told him he had to leave. I noticed while he was standing there that he had urinated himself as well. I went into the back office again and watched him on camera. He walked out slowly, said something to our guest that was sitting in the lobby, and then kind of lingered in the parking lot for a minute. That's when I called the police, because he had already made me so nervous. After he left the hotel, he went to the hotel across the street and drove through their lot. He looped around again and drove past our building real slow, looking in. My guest and I were nervous, and the guest suggested that he might come back with a weapon. So the guest waited for his ride in a separate location. Luckily, that's the climax of the story. The cops came within 5 minutes and he was arrested across the street for DUI. Turns out the guy actually was a retired police chief, confirmed by me after finding a couple of articles online linked to him. I told everyone at work to be on the lookout for him. My boyfriend had a business trip to a city 4 hours away from me, and I decided to visit him since our relationship is long distance. Since my decision to visit was spontaneous, we couldn't book a hotel room in advance for the two of us, and the hotel my boyfriend was staying at was being paid for by his company. They had a policy for not allowing guests to stay over or visit, so we had to look for a new hotel at night, and since it was a popular area, all the hotels were booked, except one. It was an okay-looking 2 or 3 star hotel, but I was okay with staying there, because we had no other option and it was a safe area, plus my boyfriend is a tough guy, so I wasn't worried about anything. We got checked in and the atmosphere of the hotel was strange. I couldn't see a single woman there except me. I didn't really care about that much because I was happy about being with my man after so long. We were staying there for 3 nights and 2 days, but my boyfriend had to leave at 7 a.m. in the morning for work and he would return later in the evening. So on the 3rd day, my boyfriend was off to work, and I was taking a nap in the afternoon. I dreamt that I was alone in the hotel, and some hotel staff dude came in to deliver breakfast and started to pull me off the bed by my legs. I immediately woke up and got a little freaked out because I was all alone, but I realized it was just a dream. I calmed myself down and watched some television. 2 hours later at around 6 p.m. and I was ready to get in the shower because my boyfriend and I were going to the beach for a date night. I was procrastinating and postponing my shower. This is when the lock beep thing on the door started going off, when you try to open the door with a key card. I was startled and I couldn't move as this man opened the door and walked in and looked at me sitting on the bed. He stared me up and down and then closed the door. I didn't understand what was going on. He had the most random explanation in the world. He said, "I was just checking whether the AC remote and TV remote are in the room." I was so shook. I knew that he was lying. I ordered food and other stuff a few times a day, and the staff probably knew that my boyfriend left pretty early in the morning, and also that he wouldn't be back until late. They knew I was alone all day long. I asked him, "How can you just barge into someone's room like that?" He said he didn't know someone was in here, which seemed like a lie. Finally, he just turned around and left without apologizing or anything. I locked the door, not like it would have mattered anyway since he had a master key, and if he wanted to come back in, he could. I called my boyfriend, and I was so thankful that I wasn't naked yet. I don't know what could have happened. I told my boyfriend about everything, and he immediately came over to get me and chewed out the hotel staff. He told the staff off, and they all played dumb and said they didn't understand what the big deal was. While we were leaving, the man who barged into my room gave me the creepiest look ever. The strangest thing is how the incident happened exactly 2 hours after I dreamt of the same thing. There was also some pee in the toilet that same day. It couldn't be me because I was sleeping and no one would use it except me. I couldn't figure out who peed and did not flush. I asked my boyfriend whether it was him and he said it was not. Thinking about the dream part really creeps me out to this day. This happened a few days ago when I, a 19-year-old male, went to a festival in a city 2 hours away from my home. I booked a hotel room for 3 days, and this happened on the second day. I had just woken up and was slightly hungover, so I decided to go eat a late lunch. This was around 5 p.m. I got back at around 7 p.m., and I was approaching the entrance to the hotel. A guy in a suit holding a computer bag followed me to the door. He looked professional, like he just got back from some sort of meeting, and I didn't think too much of it. I had an empty bottle of Coke in one hand, so I struggled to pull out my card to open the door. I found it weird that he just stood behind me when he could have just opened the door if he was staying in the hotel, but I didn't really realize that until after. Once I got into the building, however, I noticed his weird behavior. He followed me to the reception because I needed to throw away my bottle, and that's when I realized he was following me back to the elevators. The reception area of the hotel is in 2 separate areas, and he followed me to both, having no reason to stop in the lobby. When I got to the elevators, he stood a few feet beside me and watched me press the up button. I was getting more and more suspicious, and I got really anxious when he walked into the elevator with me. I gave my back to him and pressed my floor and moved to the right to let him press his floor number, which he didn't. That set off alarms. I have social anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to confront him. So I just stood in silence and waited for the door to open. When the door opened, I walked out, and he followed close behind me. My room was at the end of the hallway, and he followed me for about halfway before a group of girls, clearly tipsy, came out of their rooms, and by God's graces, I somehow knew one of them. I made a big deal out of meeting her, and they invited me to go clubbing with them. I obliged, and just talked with them as I watched the guy slowly reverse to the elevators and get on one. When we finally went down, I noticed that he was not in the lobby, and I did not see him for the rest of my stay. I really do not know what that was about, but it shook me to my core. Like I said, I have really bad anxiety at times, and this made me feel terrible. What scared me even more is that I'm physically a big guy. I do not look like an easy target. What freaks me out the most is that he just followed me so blatantly. I really do not know what to make of what happened, or what would have happened if he had followed me all the way to my room alone. I work for a national retailer. We have recently gone through a restructuring, with one of the more significant changes being a downsizing of store security across the smaller stores. My store is smaller, but it's in a large city and in a downtown area. We are currently running on little security, and at the time of this story, we had no security, which led to all sorts of issues. So as part of us dealing without security, the managers had to man the entrances and do our best to de-escalate incidents. I was merchandising some handbags when a very strange woman entered the store. She initially set off our sensor towers, and she quickly ran out, but returned about 10 minutes later after realizing that we had noticed but didn't respond to the alarm. The woman was very red, sweaty, and seemed to be under the influence of something. This was evidenced by her erratic behavior and her habit of talking to herself. Her behavior was the standard of any downtown store, and it was evidenced by her rummaging through bracelets and other accessories with her hands shaking. She seemed like a sort of run-of-the-mill tweaker, something pretty much all retail employees have dealt with at some time or another. Usually when we have shoplifters like this, the standard in our company is to provide over-the-top service and act very accommodating. We do this in the hopes of deterring a shoplifter by making them feel visible but without being a distraction to other customers. This woman slowly began to tweak her way towards the exit with a ton of merchandise that was poorly concealed. It was almost like she physically could not hide her shoplifting because she was so under the influence that it was making it difficult to control her arms and legs. Another manager and I hatched a plan to service her over to the counter to obtain some of the merchandise she was looking at and to sort of call her bluff and make her either pay or put the items on hold. After a small altercation with her and the other manager, she began to cuss and started sorting her merchandise into small piles in full view of other customers. She was frantically moving personal items in and out of a pair of black leather bags that she had not yet paid for, and after doing this for a few minutes, my fellow manager decided to help her begin moving the items to the counter. I immediately began scanning these items to be fair and treat the situation like she were any other customer. I was commenting on how fashionable the items she chose were, asking her where she planned to wear the items and stuff like that. She became more frantic as the items were wrong, and as we finished, began looking for her payment. I've seen customers fake forgetting their credit card many times, but when I tell you she was honestly frantic, I mean it. She began to get even redder and banged her hands on the counter, contesting that she had either lost her wallet or that we had it somewhere. In order to de-escalate the situation, I emptied out the plastic bags, purses, even checking some empty shoeboxes she had taken shoes from, but I wasn't producing anything. My fellow manager began to search for the wallet as well. This not being enough, she suddenly started to run around the store while being trailed by my fellow manager, leading to an outburst as she returned to the counter. She lunged across the counter, hand in the air, nearly scratching me as she yelled about a wallet and all her other stuff. At this time, I had stepped back, and my coworker and I could see on each other's faces that calling the police was the only option. I began to do so as she had a tantrum and ran out of the store with a few pieces of merchandise and supposedly without her wallet. We didn't see her again and wrote the necessary reports to forward them to our store owner. Now that the drama had subsided, I started to place items out on the floor that she didn't successfully steal. My fellow manager and I were chatting at the counter, and as I lifted one of the handbags she was toying with, out fell a box cutter. Not a simple industrial box cutter, but one with a blade that has been halfway pulled out and sharpened further to create a shiv. It was a scary realization moment for sure, and it hit me that I had been interacting with her at the counter and closest to her and potential danger. A few years ago, I was traveling back from St. Louis. I chose to drive, and it was a good road trip. When I was on my way back, I didn't really have a plan other than to just drive until I got tired. So I was able to go until probably like midnight before I was really sleepy. Rather than get a bunch of energy drinks and try to power through to the next big city, I decided to stop and sleep. I found some random town in the middle of who knows where. There wasn't much, and it seemed to be the middle of nowhere. After pulling off the highway, there was a gas station, and down the road from this was a dumpy-looking motel. It looked sketchy, but I was really tired and didn't care that much. I just wanted a place to sleep. So I pulled in and decided to get a room. Judging by the parking lot, there were plenty of open rooms for the night. I went into the office, got one, and then went down to the motel room. When I got inside, it was a pretty typical motel room that you would expect. It opened straight out to the sidewalk, and inside the room, it was not that clean, but nothing terrible. It had a small TV, a bed, and a bathroom. So I immediately just got ready for bed, and then tried to fall asleep. I know that I fell asleep really fast that night, but sometime not long after, I awoke. I remember waking up to the sound of hearing a noise. As I became more awake, I realized that somebody was tapping on the glass of the window to my room. I looked over but could not see anything, because there was a very thick curtain that was covering the entire window from the inside. I stayed there in bed listening to it. The tapping was very deliberate, like somebody was either trying to mess with me or get my attention. I didn't think there was any way that it could be something else. I was curious, but also really creeped out and didn't want to get up and see. Then it stopped. I laid there for about 2 or 3 minutes without hearing it anymore at all. So at that point, I decided to fall back asleep. But just before I did, I heard another sound. This time, someone was knocking at my door. There was no mistaking it. It was much louder than the tapping that had just been on the window, and no doubt it was the same person. I was really curious, so this time I decided to get up and see who exactly was there. I quickly got out of the bed and tiptoed over to the door. When I arrived, I did not open the door, but instead looked out of the peephole. However, when I did, I saw nothing but black. It was like whoever was at the door was deliberately covering up the peephole with their hand or something. So now I had no idea who was there. I quietly moved over to the window to try to get a look at them from there. But the way the window was positioned, you couldn't really see who was at the door unless they stood a few feet back from it. I pulled back part of the curtains at the far end and looked, but all I could see was part of the person's backside, and they appeared to be a man. I couldn't see his face or anything, just that he was at the door. I moved back and went over to the bed. The guy kept knocking every few seconds. I didn't know what to do. Then, after several minutes of the knocking, it finally stopped. I stayed there on the bed listening to see if the guy would knock anymore. After about 10 minutes of hearing nothing but silence, I finally felt relaxed enough to go back to bed. So I laid back down and within probably 5 minutes fell back asleep. The next morning I woke up and at first forgot all about the crazy encounters from the previous night. I wanted to leave early to hit the road, so I packed up my stuff and left the room at about 7:30 a.m. However, when I got outside, I saw that there was some damage to the motel room door of the room I was in. It looked like somebody had taken a crowbar or something and tried to pry the door open. Now, it was not like that when I had entered the room the previous night. I knew that for sure. I remembered the man at the door and realized he must have tried to break in. That really gave me the creeps. Then I walked to my car and saw more marks at my car door. I got inside and thankfully nothing was missing, and he didn't get in there either. I got out of there fast and was back on the highway. Looking back, it still freaks me out to think that I slept with some guy trying to get into my room. I'm just grateful that he didn't. Why he gave up, I don't know. Maybe the doors were really strong, or maybe he was just bad at trying to break in. Maybe somebody startled him, or possibly he just wanted to scare me. But either way, it was a very creepy and memorable experience at a sketchy motel. This story happened within my first few months at my current job. For some reference, the store I work at is in a plaza around other stores and is in a nicer area. We still get sketchy customers from time to time, but it's much less frequent than when I worked at Walmart. Anyways, that night I was working in the cosmetics section and I made my way up front to get reshop, items that people discarded throughout the store or didn't want to get at the registers to go put out in my section. The store was relatively quiet and slow since it was close to closing. Upon reaching the customer service desk where reshop was held, I saw this woman standing there dressed in a thick coat and looking rather fidgety. It was a colder season, so coats were common for people to wear, and I wasn't super thrown off. She could have been antsy because she had been waiting for a while. I asked her, "Hey, is everything okay? Can I help you with anything?" She looked up at me and kind of narrowed her eyes. She said, "I'm waiting on a manager. Are you a manager?" I told her no, and she just kind of huffed and then asked when they would get there. I told her I'm not sure. There's one manager in the store and he's probably in the middle of one of his closing duties. She huffed again and just turned to face the store. At that point, I just thought that she was a regular Karen. I again asked her if there was anything I could help her with in the meantime. She just shook her head and I left her alone. I was debating on waiting with her until a manager got there. But even though it was slow, I still had some work to do, and I figured that he would be there soon enough. I grabbed my reshop and headed back to my department. The next day when I came in for my shift, my closing manager pulled me aside and asked if I remembered the lady from last night up at customer service. I said yes and asked if he had gotten to her. He said no and explained what happened. Apparently, this woman had a note and a gun on her. Her plan was to give the note to the manager, announcing that she was robbing the store and had a weapon. However, since during closing hours there's only one manager and they have a million things to do, it takes them a while to do or get something done out of those closing procedures. The lady had left the store because the manager was taking too long and went to the store right next to us. She did end up robbing that store instead of ours. Nobody to my knowledge was harmed though, just shaken up, which I don't blame them for. There's no doubt it was a close call that night, or what might have happened if she really did have a weapon and wanted to stick with our store. If I did decide to wait with her for the manager and the lady got other ideas, who knows what would have happened. I stayed at a pretty average hotel one time. I travel quite often for work. It takes me all around the country, and so I've been to many hotels. Over the years, I've stayed in everything from really great places to complete dumps. This one was somewhere right in the middle. So it was probably on like the third floor probably, just in a typical room with one bed and a nice TV. I stayed up in my hotel room pretty late finishing some work stuff. Then to unwind, I was watching some TV in bed until I got sleepy. I remember that at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a call on the phone in my hotel room. I found this strange immediately. It was not my cell phone, but the phone that they have in the room. It would have to be the front desk calling, but why would they bother me at 1 a.m.? So I walked over to the phone and answered it. I heard a man's voice on the other end say that I needed to come down to the front desk. I asked why, and he didn't say. He just said to come down now, and then he hung up the phone. Now, I had checked in much earlier, and it had been a woman at the desk when I did, so this was not the individual that I had dealt with, and I figured this guy was the night front desk person. I was really annoyed and ticked off that they would call me at 1 a.m. and not tell me why. I angrily put on my shoes and then left the room. I walked down to the elevator and then went down to the first floor. When I got there, the hotel looked completely empty. I walked over to the front desk and nobody was there. Near the front desk was the breakfast area, and there were some meeting rooms down a nearby hallway, but not one person was to be seen anywhere. I looked behind the counter and now was even more angry. I didn't stop and ring the bell at the desk or ask if anyone was there. I didn't care. I just went straight back for the elevator and got back on. If they were going to bother me in the wee hours of the morning, at least be where you asked me to go. I'm not going to wait around. So I took the elevator back up to my floor, got off, and then went back to my room. I went inside and then got back in bed watching TV just like before. About 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I was so angry. I answered it and said, "What do you want?" The same man told me to come down to the front desk. He was speaking louder now and in a more commanding tone. I told him I already did. The guy said that I had not and I had to go back. As he was still speaking, I hung up the phone and then unplugged it from the wall. Then I walked over, got back in bed, and laid down. It had been a long day and I was tired. So after laying down, within about 10 minutes, I started to fall asleep. But I was interrupted again. This time, I heard a knocking on the door. I got up from the bed and stormed over there. When I got to the door, I heard somebody quickly walking away. I looked out the peephole just as I was hearing this, but they were gone by the time I looked out. Then I swung the doors open and heard only footsteps. I looked around and saw no one. There were a few places in the hallway they could have gone. As it's not just a long hallway, there were different hallways connected to it. I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't know why I was getting messed with. I went back to bed and this time fell asleep. The next morning, everything was fine. I went back downstairs for the hotel breakfast and there were now lots of other people around. I went to the front desk and asked who was working overnight. I was told a woman's name and I reported what was going on. They said that's not something that she would do. And I know that I was also talking to a man, not a woman. So I don't know who that was who was calling me or why they were talking from the front desk. I still don't have answers, but that's the craziest thing that's happened to me in my many travels. I was about 24 years old, working both the bakery and the deli at a new neighborhood Walmart because everyone else had called out. It was about a week into opening, about 6 years ago when this happened. Barely anyone ever showed up for work, so our store was relatively empty of staff. This time was worse because it was the week of Thanksgiving, so everything was hectic and there was no one else to help me. I was working both sections on my own. I had sliced cheese for this guy in a red sweater early that morning. He barely talked, just pointed to the chub of cheese and said, 2 pounds. So I sliced it up, asked if he needed anything else, and thanked him for his service. I then returned to the bakery to bake French bread. In this store, the deli is at the back of the store. You go through the walk-in fridge and it opens into the bakery. The other door the bakery leads to is right into the back room. I had the bread baking and came back into the deli about 20 minutes later when I saw the guy from just before standing by the shelves. I tried not to think anything of it and started cooking some chickens. He pulled up his hood and just continued standing by the shelves near the deli case. I asked if he needed anything else, and he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me quietly. I got a bit wary and decided to go to the back corner for my walkie-talkie. My friend is security of this store, so I called him up and told him what was up. This was Walmart, so I was assuming that maybe he was thinking of shoplifting or something, since theft is very bad in Walmart. Security told me to act casual and go into the bakery, and he would check out the guy, pretending I was busy, and ask him if he needed help. I was bagging up the French bread when my friend came in, saying that he had to chat with the guy and he was just taking his time shopping. I mentioned that he had no cart or groceries outside of the cheese, and it was kind of freaking me out since I was literally the only staff in the back of the store. He told me that he would do rounds every hour until we closed, and I thanked him for his help. I put out the bread and found the guy leaning against the deli case, almost hanging out behind it. I asked him if he needed anything, and he just shook his head no. I told him he can't be behind the counter, so he scooted back just until he was out of the area, and I kind of smiled a little, thanking him before starting to pack up the chickens. At this point, I didn't want to be there, but I couldn't just not work. Every hour or so, security did the rounds, and the guy moved back to the shelves whenever they would show up before returning right back to the deli case. He had been in the store for so long, and if we hadn't been so understaffed and busy, he probably would have been dealt with already, but he was allowed to just hang around. I grabbed my walkie as I began to close the bakery, and told the manager up front that I was starting to get scared by the customer and I didn't feel safe. She promised to check things out, and I stayed in the bakery. About half an hour passed, and the manager came back to tell me that they had the guy leave. I thanked her and finished cleaning the bakery. Everything seemed fine as I started cleaning the deli, but then I heard the bell ring and I came out to find him there. He asked me if he could just have a half-pound of the cheese he asked for before. I did as he said, handed him the cheese, and he walked over to the chickens. I was pretty much watching him constantly as I was closing. Security came around, and I told my friend that the manager had him leave, yet he was back again, and I didn't think I could do my job. Knowing I had an hour left of my shift, my friend entertained the guy, distracting him by talking about food so I could hurry up with my cleaning. As I finished, my friend and I shared a look, and he headed back up front to the store manager to talk to her about kicking him out of the store again. The guy just stayed by the chickens, so I assumed all was fine. I went into the kitchen and started shutting everything down. My hands turned off the lights, and I looked up, and there was the guy just standing in front of the door. I panicked, yelling at him that we were closed. He pushed open the door and started rushing at me. I freaked out, yanking open the walk-in door, running through it the best I could without running into anything, and ran through the bakery to escape into the back room. At this point, I was shaking, and I heard what sounded like the guy following me through the fridge, the plastic guards rattling. I ran out of the back room, through the store, and straight up to security and the manager. I told them what was going on and that I was leaving. They tried to calm me down while the manager called the police. As I was standing there, the guy in the sweater was making his way through the store. He was pointing at me and shouting, "Hey, hey, get back here." The manager was trying to keep me calm, and my friend told him to leave me alone and to leave the store. He had his hands up to keep pushing the guy away, but he just kept walking closer to us, pushing against my friend. Luckily, we were in an outdoor mall, so mall security arrived because the police called them to help out until they got there. I called out for the rest of the week because I was just too scared to return. My store manager called me in the middle of the week to apologize for what happened and asked me to come back, promising that I'd no longer be left alone like that. I agreed to return and asked him what happened with the guy. They literally had no idea what he wanted with me. They kept questioning him and he just wouldn't talk. I guess they arrested him for harassment and trespassing charges, and that's all they knew. Soon after, I put a transfer to the supercenter because I was done with potentially risking my life for a minimum wage job. Last year, I went on vacation with my girlfriend Zoe to Florida. We flew down there and we got a pretty decent hotel that was close to the beach. It was only a couple of blocks away and we could walk there, which was nice. We were staying there for like 5 days. A few days in, something crazy happened. So we had been enjoying the vacation to that point. We spent a lot of time at the beach and at local restaurants and attractions. One night we got back late and we were both tired from being gone all day. I went to take a shower, and while I was in there, I heard Zoe say she was going to get some ice. So she left the room, and I finished showering. Then I went back over and sat down. About 2 minutes later, Zoe came back into the room rather quickly. I noticed that she shut the door really fast and locked it behind her. Then she said that some creepy guy had been following her. I asked her to elaborate, and she said how she went down to the second floor for the ice machine. She stated that when she started walking down the hallway of the second floor, she saw this guy kind of standing around. She went into the room to get ice and heard the man start to walk over. He got to the small room where the ice machine was and entered. Zoe thought that he was waiting for her to be done so he could get some ice. But when she was done, he just stood there looking at her. She walked past him and left, and then he started following her down the hallway. Not wanting to wait for the elevator, she took the stairs, which the man did as well. When she got back to our floor, she walked as fast as she could for the room. The man was described as maybe 50s with a grayish goatee and somewhat tall and thin. I decided to go out into the hallway to see if he was still there. When I got out there though, I saw no one. It was completely empty. I walked around a little and figured that he was gone. So I went back into the room, and soon after we fell asleep for the night. I figured that was the end of that. The next morning we were leaving the hotel. Right after we got out and were walking on the sidewalk, Zoe said she saw the man again. She pointed to a guy who was just across the street on a sidewalk. I looked over and saw the man. He was not looking at us and appeared to just be kind of standing around. We kept walking and then turned at the next street. We were out for a long time. Later on in the day though, we were a long ways from the hotel in the city. We were walking down the sidewalk and we both noticed the man again. As we were waiting to cross the street, we looked back and noticed the man standing about 20 feet behind us. There was a good amount of other people walking on the sidewalks and stuff, so he blended in fairly easy, but we still noticed him. I didn't know if this was just a crazy coincidence or not. I had a feeling it wasn't. I wanted to get away from the man. We decided to turn and take this odd route. When we did, it seemed like we lost him because I stopped seeing him. Later on, we went to a restaurant and sat outside. As we were there, I noticed the same guy standing across the street. He appeared to be looking at us, or mostly at Zoe. The guy was really creeping us out now. It appeared as though he was trying to follow Zoe around. I thought about getting up and confronting him right there. However, I decided not to. The man continued to look in our direction for probably 5 minutes. Then he walked away. We didn't see him for the rest of the night as we were out. When we got back though, we saw him again. As we were walking into the lobby, the man was already inside, sitting on a chair sort of in the corner. We walked to the elevators, and as the doors were closing, we saw him get up. He did not walk over to try to get on the elevator, but we were suspicious of what he might do. We got up to our floor, and then quickly went to our room and got inside. After getting in, Zoe started looking out of the peephole. She thought that the guy might try to go to our door or something. Like a minute later, she told me that she saw him. I was angry and decided to confront the guy. Zoe said that he was just standing around sort of by our door. He did not knock on it though. So I went over to the door, opened it, and went out into the hallway. Now it was just me and the man there. Sure enough, he was standing there. Now it was just me and the man there. Right when I got out though, he started walking away. I told him to stop, and I asked what his problem was. The man stopped and turned around. He had a very angry look on his face. I asked him why he was stalking us. The man did not say anything. He started walking over to me and then pulled something from his pocket. At first, I didn't know what it was, but within a few seconds, I recognized it to be a stun gun. The man kept going closer to me and then lunged at me with it. I jumped back and thankfully did not get hit. I took off running as I didn't have anything to defend myself with. I went to the stairs, ran down, and was not chased. When I got to the lobby, I reported the man to the front desk. They ended up calling the police. I stayed down in the lobby until they arrived, and I called Zoe and told her to stay in the room. The police showed up a short time later and looked around the hotel for the man. After a while, they found him and left the hotel with him. I'm not sure if he was arrested or not, but I know that he got trespassed from the hotel for sure. When I got back to the room, Zoe told me that after I had called her, she heard a knock on the door. She knew it was the man and did not answer. She also said that he tried opening the door, which was locked. For the rest of the trip, we did not see him. About 4 years ago, my wife and I planned an evening out for her birthday. My parents babysat and we went to a restaurant. Because I drove, I didn't drink, so we didn't bother to go anywhere else after we were done in the restaurant, but because the night was still young, we decided to go on a long drive. A location which is relatively nearby is a large national park. We decided to take a drive up there and just sit and chat under the stars. When we arrived up there, the country roads were dead, and I found a nice open parking area to pull the car into. We sat inside the car parking, and eventually things carried on to more romantic activities. At no point did either of us leave the car. As we were in the car, headlights lit up our vehicle. It scared us, as we were far out in the wilderness and did not expect to see another car at this hour. I thought the car was just a fellow traveler passing by, but to our surprise, the car pulled into the area and began circling us. I put the keys in the ignition and said, "Let's go." I drove out of the parking lot area and back onto the road and then back to the main connecting road. The car followed. Once in the main connecting road, we could see the make, model, and color of the car that was now following us. It was a dark red Ford. I drove quickly but not recklessly, as we still had a long way to go to get back to civilization, and I didn't want to pop a tire or something like that stranding us out there with this person following us. The car matched my speed and was right up behind us. At this point, neither of us were 100% sure if we were being paranoid or if this car really meant to be following us, so I said, "I'll pull off at a random turn and see what they do." I put my foot down, and after a few hundred yards down the main road, I made a late left turn down a really narrow side lane. I pulled up after a while on this side road, stopped, and turned my lights off, and watched in my rearview mirror to see what the car would do behind us. A few seconds later, there he was. He had turned off and was now coming down this narrow lane towards us again. At first, we were blinded by his headlights, but I was sure that it was him. As he got closer, it became apparent that it was the same car, so I drove down the road further, and luckily, I found a space large enough to turn my car around. I spun around and back to the main road again. He followed. Now back on the main road for a second time, I did now decide to speed. As I was heading towards the built-up city center, he kept behind me the entire way. Eventually, we stopped at a red light, and he was right behind. I looked in my mirror and saw his face, a middle-aged, slightly tubby man with glasses and thin gray hair. At this point, I was freaked out. We both were. I said to my wife, "I'm going to keep driving and try to lose him, but I'm not driving home so he doesn't know where we live." She agreed. We drove around for maybe another 10 minutes, and he was still following. At this point, I was beginning to consider the possibility of calling the cops, but I thought I would give it a few more minutes of trying to lose him. Thankfully, a few streets later, he turned off and was never seen again. Looking back, I don't know who that guy was or why he was following us. The fact that he followed us through the wilderness and into the city for a whole hour makes me think he may have had sinister intentions.